Hello, my name is Joe Kramer. I'm an attorney here at Lipsitz, Pontario in Comerford, and I am one of the partners in the firm. I want to talk to you today about asbestos exposure for auto mechanics. It could be someone who does work on their own cars, it could be a mechanic in a shop, and it could be someone who just is involved in working in the bay where other mechanics work. For instance, if you're a parts manager or running parts at a garage, you're back in the bay where this type of work is being done. Now, when we talk about asbestos exposure and workers who work with cars, we're typically talking about something called a friction product, meaning the linings on brake shoes and the linings on clutch discs used in manual transmission. Essentially how exposure occurs, if you've ever had your car taken once a year to the mechanic to have your car inspected and you're told you need new brakes, what happens is that a brake shoe, particularly a drum brake, there's a metal lining, a metal shoe portion on top of that metal shoe. There's about a quarter of an inch to a half an inch of a friction product, which was made of asbestos. It's the same thing on big tractor trailers, except it's bigger. Whereas you might have a shoe that's 12 inches long on a car, on a big commercial truck, or a trailer that goes with that truck. We're talking about sometimes 5 or 6 times that amount, but the exposure is pretty much the same. Depending on when you did this work, your exposure might be a little different. Earlier times, what would happen is that the metal portion of the shoe was used over and over and over, and what would happen is it would be this quarter to a half inch lining that was on a car brake would be removed when it was wore out. You take an electric drill, you drill the rivets out, they pop off the old shoe and put a new shoe on, and then put a new asbestos lining on, which would be ground to shape. Pretty much the work is, at least with respect to the brake shoe itself, it's pretty much the same. What happens is that the mechanic comes in, he takes the wheel off, he gets the brake drum off, which is a metal drum. Brakes work essentially if you step on your brake pedal. Hydraulic fluid runs through a line, it compresses the brake shoe against the metal lining, and that's what stops the car. The lining wears out, and a lot of it does remain trapped within the drum. So what happens is the mechanic comes in, he'll get the wheel off, get the drum off, he'll take an air hose, he'll clean off all that dust that's in there. And a lot of that dust, not all of it, but a good amount of that dust is asbestos containing. And as you might expect, if you're using air to blow something out, it does create a big cloud of dust. The replacement process also creates a good amount of dust. What happens is new brakes that had asbestos on them, they had a glaze on them. Essentially, if you look at a brand new brake shoe, you would see a shiny surface. So what the mechanic would do is take some emery cloth or some sandpaper, and they would sand the surface of the brake shoe, releasing asbestos dust into the breathing zone. In earlier times, the 70s and earlier, the front toe and the rear back of the shoe would come from the manufacturer. It would be square, like at a right angle. And what would happen if you left it just that way, if you stepped on the brake pedal, at least in the beginning, the brake shoe could get hung up on the drum. So it would take either a grinder or a file, and they would grind the edges down so it would be more of on an angle. That's typically, at the end, of course, maybe after all this is done, you have to clean it up before you put it on the car. They would sometimes use compressed air. At the end of a shift, the mechanics would keep their garage clean, and they would either use a brush or a broom, or sometimes compressed air, and they'd sweep it up. Now, the other friction surface that we're talking about has to do with what they call a manual transmission. That's a stick shift, four on the floor, or any other name. Kind of went out of favor except for sports cars and pickup trucks. But how a clutch works is that essentially there's a surface in it called a clutch ditch, which is very similar to a brake shoe. There's an asbestos lining in it, and it wears out, and eventually clutches have to be replaced. Clutches were kept in a metal structure called a bell housing, and it was bolted together. Once you drop that bell housing out, there'd be a whole bunch of asbestos that was left over from using your clutch over and over, which would cause you to be exposed when they cleaned it out. Again, compressed air was used to clean it. Much like dealing with a brake shoe, mechanics would typically take some emery cloth or some sandpaper, and they'd give that clutch disc a light sanding, thereby releasing more asbestos into the air. And that's pretty much, in a very abbreviated form, exposure to brake and clutch work in a nutshell. If you're watching this, we hope that you're watching it for informational purposes only. Nobody wants anyone to get sick, but if you find yourself in a situation that you have an asbestos disease, be it asbestosis, mesothelioma, or lung cancer, and you need to talk to someone, we're here for you. We'll be happy to come to your house and give you a free consultation. Thank you, and God bless you.